Welcome to the Masters of Resilience podcast. This show is an exploration of the unseen and unheard stories of adversity that shape the journeys of high performers. These conversations will help you better understand the mindset, habits, and behaviors that empower these exceptional leaders to endure the most challenging moments of their careers and emerge stronger than ever. Your hosts are Ryan Seager and Mark Phillips. Let's dive in to more.
Welcome back to the Masters of Resilience podcast, where we explore the idea of learning how to thrive amidst adversity. Today, we're joined by Max DeZara, the managing partner of Akoya Capital, based in Chicago. Max has been a legendary leader in the lower middle market corporate transaction space and has a remarkable ability to stay calm amidst life's storms, embrace uncertainty with confidence, and approach every challenge with a genuine curiosity. In this episode, we'll uncover the mindset and the principles that have shaped his success and resilience. Enjoy this conversation with an inspiring leader that has many lessons we can all learn from. Well, Max, thanks for joining us on the Masters of Resilience podcast. We're thrilled to have you here. And I would love to hear a little bit to start, just a little bit of your background, how you got to leading Akoya. If you wouldn't mind sharing with that would be great.
I'd be happy to. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to participate in this session. So I've come to the whole private equity world through a very untraditional career path. For most folks in PE, it's pretty linear. Mine has been more of a moonshot than a linear career progression. So I'll spend a couple minutes and just share a bit about my background, because I think it'll help provide some context in terms of kind of how we got to where we are. So I grew up in a very entrepreneurial environment. I was actually quite fortunate to have had that exposure very early on in life. My father sort of built and lived the American dream. So my dad was he immigrated to the United States in the late 50s, and it was sort of a classic American success story. I mean, he literally came here with a suitcase full of clothes, about $1,000, and a tremendous amount of hope and aspiration, and really an extraordinary entrepreneurial spirit. My father spoke 4 languages. English wasn't one of them, so he was also disadvantaged from a linguistic perspective. Spanish was his major, his mother tongue. And so when he came here, my father worked, 3 jobs, saved as much money as he could. And then in the early 60s, he was one of the first people he started a little business out of our apartment. And he was one of the first people to advertise on Telemundo, which was a Spanish network television station. And I used to tease my father that he never met a camera he didn't like. So my dad was the face and the voice of the company. And over a couple of decades, he built this business that started in our apartment into a company that, ultimately had, significant kind of brand equity and became a household name in the Chicago metropolitan area. So my earliest memories in life were going to work with my father in and around our family business. I'm the eldest. I have 2 younger brothers. So my life was sort of predestined, right? I'm going to grow up and take over the little family fiefdom. So I'll fast forward. I grew up, I went to work full-time in the family business. I worked there for a couple of years and decided pretty early on that I wanted to do something outside of our family business. And for me, I think it was predicated largely on the fact that I had a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for what my father had accomplished. And I think there was something inside me wanting me to prove to myself and probably prove to my father on some level that I could be successful independent of what he had built. As I mentioned, I have 2 younger brothers, so I had a high degree of confidence that one or both of them would go into the family business and ultimately preserve my father's legacy. And fortunately, that's the way it turned out. So we bought my father out in the early 90s as he was moving into retirement. I was lucky enough to have invested alongside my brothers. And then it was kind of a classic G2 scenario. When we bought the company from my father, the business was generating about $15 million of revenue. And over the next 12 or 13 years, my brothers grew it to well north of $100 million of revenue. And then ultimately wound up selling to a large strategic buyer, which created generational wealth for our family. Well, in particular for my brother's families. I did reasonably well on my investment, but they really did the heavy lifting and deserve all the credit. They did an amazing job. So back to my story, I was in my early 20s. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do because I frankly never had to think about it. I had a couple offers. I decided to pursue an opportunity with an executive search firm in Chicago, an executive recruiting firm. I worked there for 3 years. I really enjoyed the work and kind of discovered that I was actually pretty good at it. So at the age of 26 years old, I decided that I wanted to start my own executive search business, which I did. So I founded a company called the Carlyle Group in the early 80s. And with the help of some extremely talented people that, we trained and developed along the way, we built the Carlyle Group into one of the largest retained executive search firms in the country. And then we were approached by a strategic acquirer back in the late 90s. They were headquartered in New York and traded on the NYSE. And their chairman had raised well over $100 million of equity capital. And his objective was to aggregate the executive search and staffing industry. They had a search firm that was the crown jewel in their portfolio. So we wound up selling the company and merging in with the Whitney Group. And as a result of the merger, it created what at the time was one of the top 10 retained executive search firms in the world. So it was a great opportunity, a chance for myself and my partners to monetize the significant equity value that we created in our platform, and also a chance to go from a regional and national footprint to a global footprint. So it made a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And shortly after the merger, I was asked to lead our global private equity practice. So essentially what that meant is that we represented PE firms around the globe, helping them build out their operating companies, their portfolio companies. And we focus primarily on C-suite recruitment and board level recruitment. And it was an extraordinary opportunity. We represented dozens and dozens of PE firms really across the whole continuum. So on one end of the spectrum, we would work with PE firms that may have 200 or 300 of AUM, all the way up to KKR and Carlyle would have tens of billions of AUM. And that experience just provided a really interesting insight and perspective on the PE landscape, really understanding how PE worked and what the various strategies were. And I was really drawn to the handful, and I mean literally, you could count on one hand at the time, the handful of private equity firms that executed more of a leader-led strategy where they took more of an operationally centric approach towards their investment strategies and unlocking value at the portfolio company, whereby they would align or partner with industry luminaries, right? So individuals that have decades of deep, relevant domain expertise in a particular industry that would guide their investment strategy and serve in a very meaningful governance role post-transaction. And then they would be supported by a highly skilled team of investment professionals. And that just intuitively made a lot of sense to me, vis-a-vis the traditional private equity model, which is, uber smart finance professionals. As I mentioned earlier, it's pretty linear, right? So it's undergrad, investment banking, B school, right into PE. But that traditional model really puzzled me, still does puzzle me, because these are finance professionals who frankly have never had an operating role. But yet they're developing and executing strategy at portfolio companies. So the whole model really puzzled me, and I was really drawn to the sort of leader-led, sector-focused strategy. And as I started to bifurcate the market, what was becoming clear is that the firms that were executing that strategy were typically the mega funds, billions and billions of AUM. But as you start to work your way to the middle market, and then more specifically the lower end of the middle market, that strategy was virtually non-existent. So much to my wife's chagrin, I reinvested basically everything I made by selling my executive search firm into seeding and starting up what today is Akoya Capital. And it's been a very rocky road along the way, but I'm really pleased to say that and I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish over the last 20 years since we started Akoya.
Wow. Well, I've seen it from somewhat of a front row seat, but it's been super inspiring to see what you guys are building. I'd love to zoom in a little bit too on some of the challenge. I maybe zooming into kind of highlighting your rocky road side of the business. I know when you're in the business of really spending a ton of time and pouring into these businesses. There's the COVID-19s of the world. There's other impacts. So what is one example or a couple examples of things that you guys have gone through where you've had to really kind of dig in and deal with the challenge, the adversity, and coming out of that?
Gosh, Ryan, there's been so many, it's difficult to isolate one or two.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Let me double click on a couple of things that occurred during the Carlisle journey, right? Because that was a 20-year journey. There were multiple times that I, mortgaged my house, second mortgage on my house. We went through 3 pretty significant recessions during that time frame. But I would say sort of by far and away, the most significant scar tissue occurred during the Great Recession. I sold Carlisle to Whitney. I actually bought Carlisle back from Whitney 6 years after the transaction at basically 20 cents on the dollar. That's another story. But I bought the company back in 2004 and was launching Akoya in 2005. And at the time, search business was really rocking and rolling. We had borrowed several $1 million from the bank to support some of the growth initiatives. We in 2007 came off the best year in the history of the company. Q1 of 2008 was the best quarter in the history of the company. And then Q2 of 2008, it was as though somebody flipped a switch. I mean, literally, our revenue went from about $1.5 million a month to literally zero. I mean, it just, the whole world imploded. And this is pre-Lehman. Lehman happened in September of 2008. So we were really kind of an early indicator in terms of what was coming around the corner. So it was a devastating time. I got out in front of it. I had conversations with our lender, letting them know that things were going from bad to worse. And by December of 2008, we had renegotiated all of the terms on the loan. So we had a $3 million unsecured line of credit, no personal guarantee supporting our growth. We'd come to terms on Christmas Eve 2008, and I went to Arizona on a family vacation. I got back in early January and received a phone call from the senior VP at the bank saying, "Look, we need to get together." We got together, said, "I have good news and bad news. Good news is the committee's willing to approve what we've agreed upon. The bad news is we need you to sign a personal guarantee." Which now we're in early 2009, right? So it's becoming clear that we were really in for a pretty significant downturn in the economy. So I was very reluctant to sign a personal guarantee. At the time, I had 4 partners in the business. I sat down with them and said, "Look, I'm willing to sign up for my share of the personal guarantee as long as everybody's willing to, sign up for their proportionate share." Frankly, they were all unwilling to sign up. So it was a pretty significant situation. So I informed the bank. The bank froze our accounts, and I was forced to take the company into Chapter 11. So we had to really wind everything down, and these were relationships that I had for 20 years. So I basically had to sell the company off in piecemeal. I was the trustee and had to deal with all the creditors. So I spent really from early 2009 through middle of 2011, so 2.5 years, just trying to dig out from this mess. The same time I was launching Akoya Capital, so there was a 3-year period where I it was very tenuous. I mean, frankly, I put a couple $1 million of my own capital to try to save Carlisle. That was unsuccessful, while funding Akoya and trying to get Akoya off the ground. So it was pretty tenuous. We kind of getting ahead of the curve. I built my dream house in 2005. We sold our dream house, downsized. I mean, it was really disruptive on a lot of levels.
And so, Max, when you're in that situation, you're kind of in your back against a wall moment. What I can just imagine the amount of stress and weight of those types of things. So, what were the things that I guess the steps that you had to take to try to get yourself mentally in a good place to try to tackle those types of issues? I think those are something that we consistently have to deal with, and it's hard to figure out the right steps sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I had a very good support system around me. So my wife was very supportive. I have a small group of sort of trusted advisors and close confidants that I would kind of lean on. I felt it was important to be able to kind of share what was going on, gather different perspectives and insights to help make good decisions. I also found, Ryan, it's really interesting and that, and I'm not exactly sure what to attribute this to, frankly, but I stayed remarkably calm in the midst of the storm. I didn't panic. I was never kind of unwavering, and at the time, so now we're in the Great Recession time. I'm, trying to wind down Carlisle and trying to starting Akoya. And I had, frankly, to be transparent, had gone through all of my savings. I mean, I was, really down to the wire. I had this vision around what I really believe we could achieve at Akoya, and kind of against all odds and in the midst of the storm, I never lost sight of that vision and never lost sight of the conviction in terms of what I really believe was possible. So I'd say, I had very good support system around me. I really tried to take care of myself physically and emotionally. I made sure that I worked out constantly and made sure that I ate healthy. I started practicing yoga and meditation during that time, which really helped, frankly, just keep me grounded. So those were some of the kind of the tools that I leveraged.
Yeah, I think the calm in the storm piece is I think that's kind of what a lot of us aspire to try to reach. Again, I think there's an element of, there's no amount of preparation that can prepare you for some of these things, but I think being able to have a mindset that can handle the uncertainty well, I know that's what I'm trying to get myself to do. So whether that's, I want people to hear that, the physical fitness, call it the spirituality element, whatever that means for people. Yeah. But I think it sounds like those are some paramount things that allowed you to deal with some of that stress.
And I think, Ryan, just as an entrepreneur, I like to think that I've developed a very, very high tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty, right? And just being nimble and being able to pivot and being able to, make different decisions based on gathering new data real time. But I think a high tolerance for ambiguity is an attribute that I think serves folks well in the midst of a shit show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Max, part of your story that really fascinated me was you kind of alluded to this model of investing that was people-centric, and I'm really enamored by that. I imagine it wasn't something that was terribly common at that stage, and so for you to take everything that you had earned and put it into a model like this was probably, I'm sure if more than one person kind of looked at it and squinted their eyes hard to try to figure it out, but I guess I'm less interested in, exactly what that looked like and more the philosophical. When you have this vision, when you have this belief, and you use that word conviction in something that this is the right way to do it, but nobody else is doing it that way. Obviously, there's a massive opportunity on the other side of that belief system. But how do you convince yourself to keep going in the right direction when the current of society and what everybody else is telling you is to do something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there were a handful of analogs, right? So there's one good example. There's a firm in Chicago by the name of GTCR. It's Bruce Raumer's old firm, and GTCR started in the early 80s. They pioneered something called, CEO investing or CEO first investing, whereby they would align with a kind of been there, done that CEO, provide a lot of resources to support that CEO in a buy and build strategy.
Right.
So there was a good analog for what was possible at the very upper end of the private equity spectrum, right? And it just intuitively made sense to me. So I that was one good analog. But my experience, Mark, what my experience taught me, because we literally placed hundreds of executives on behalf of dozens and dozens of private equity firms, and I could really see firsthand the impact it had on the performance at the portfolio company level by over-investing in people, right? By looking for like really top grading the leadership team and looking for almost an overkill solution across a number of the key functional areas. I saw a direct correlation between the investment in human capital and shareholder value returns, and how that impacted shareholder value returns. And the notion of investing in a company where someone like my father and my brothers put their whole life into it, right? Decades and decades of experience. And then to, have, I don't know, a 30-something-year-old MBA from Harvard come in, like literally smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Sort of dismissing, what this individual spent their life's work building.
Right.
Was puzzling to me, right? And so the notion of being able to pursue an investment opportunity in a sector where our partners have been there, have done it before, have navigated these uncharted waters, it just brings a tremendous amount of credibility and gravitas to that founder who's genuinely looking for a partner that can help take their company to the next level. And so our model resonates well. Everything we do, we invest in founder-built businesses. So we're always the first institutional or outside capital coming into the company. And I'd say even though we've invested in 22 different platforms across a few different sectors, and the common denominator is, they've all been founder-built businesses. They're lower in the middle market. So we define that as companies generally between 5 and 15 million of EBITDA, said another way, 30 to about 150 million of revenue. It's really where we like to start. And I would say that they're fundamentally healthy businesses. So they're, we don't invest in fixer-uppers or distressed assets. And while they're healthy, they're almost always underachieving to their full potential. And we find that they're usually under-resourced across 3 dimensions. They're financially under-resourced, where, again, founders done an amazing job getting it to a certain level, but they don't want to bet the ranch to sort of take it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
We can clearly solve for that. We find they're almost always under-resourced from a human capital perspective. And when we're underwriting an investment opportunity, we're really looking at it from the perspective of how can we double, triple, quadruple the size of the company. And so we over-invest in people very early on in our hold period, right? Because you want to make sure you've got the right organizational structure in place that can support scaling the company and really taking it to the next level. And that leverages my 30 years of experience in the human capital aspect.
It's amazing to hear how you've woven together. I mean, even having an immigrant father who started a business, I mean, that's totally informing the way that you think about how to honor and how to care for this person that's building the business, coupled with your own human talent experience, expertise at the very least. That's so fascinating, Max. And the last question I have on that thread is, what's the role of humility then, as you approach these businesses and recognize that we have some of the answers. We don't have all the answers. We haven't been building this business for 20 years. What's the role of humility there?
Humility from our perspective or theirs?
From yours.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting, Mark. Our sector leaders bring that domain knowledge, right? Which is
Right.
of high value to the investors. I've been in their shoes. I've been to the edge of the cliff more than once. There were several years where you just met Karen. Karen actually took home more than I did, right? I mean, I was the last one to get paid if there was anything to go around. So it just, having that appreciation and recognition for how tenacious you need to be, how scrappy you need to be, to kind of work your way through the inevitable obstacles that you're going to encounter as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think that resonates with the businesses that we invest in. So, when we show up, it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, we've got these sector experts who bring decades of credibility in their sector. So we're bringing a lot of intellectual capital. I am an entrepreneur. I built a couple of businesses. I failed miserably. One of them failed miserably after an extraordinary run, frankly. So I bring that I think I bring that credibility and that just, I really do appreciate the trials and tribulations it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur. And then we have an investment team we have a 5-person investment team that would rival any that you'd find at any middle market private equity fund. So, we bring that financial acumen that you'd find anywhere. We bring the operating expertise and domain expertise that is really a bit unusual. And then I just, I bring out really a certain just kind of been there, done that, really understand what it's like.
Yeah. So it's actually empathy is the word I'm hearing almost more than I'm sure there's a ton of humility baked in, but really what sets you apart is the empathy, understanding where they've been and appreciating how difficult it must be.
Well said.
Yeah. A little bit of a continuation of that, Max, too, is I think that the sector leader operating partner model that you guys have instituted is a fascinating one. And I think the concept of surrounding yourself with leaders that are probably stronger than you in a lot of ways. And I think I want to dig into that concept a little bit too, because I think when you're building teams and trying to be a good leader, you start to realize there's a lot that to Mark's humility point, there's a lot that I don't know or that I'm not great at. So it's how do you do that effectively? Surround yourself with people that really know more than you, that can really help you elevate.
Yep.
On the investment side, on the portfolio company side, building a business, all those kinds of things.
Yep. No, that's a great question, Ryan. Sort of getting back to your point about humility, right? I think one of the attributes that has led to my success is kind of a very low ego drive, right? So, when you think about it, I went from an executive recruiting firm into private equity. The learning curve was enormously steep, right? So, all the financial acumen and rigor, I had absolutely none of that expertise, right? So it was imperative that we recruited and developed a team of people that brought that expertise in spades. Our sector leaders, these are subject matter experts. These are people, they're like the Michael Jordans of their industries, right? I mean, they're truly luminaries. They bring such insight and experience. I could never replicate that, right? So one of the things I think I attribute to the success that we've enjoyed is, and I think this is really important, surround yourself with the best people possible. Surround yourself with people that balance off your blind spots, that compensate for some of the areas that you may not, have the organizational kind of developmental opportunities that some of these other folks have been able to achieve. we brought a partner on board about 5 years ago, an operating partner. And shortly after Denny joined, I took everybody to Mexico and we did a retreat, like a strategic session retreat. I invited the whole team out there and it was really interesting. On the way back to Chicago at the airport, he pulled me aside and he said, I have an observation I want to share with you. And I hope you don't take this the wrong way. And I said, what's that? And he's like, I'm really incredibly impressed with the team that you've curated here, right? He said, it reminds me of The Dirty Dozen, the movie The Dirty Dozen. And I don't know if I'm dating myself, but that was a movie where they brought these 12 kind of crazy characters together, all different walks of life, but the sum of the parts was greater. The whole was greater than the sum of the parts, right? And the message was, and this is by design, we have an extremely diverse set of perspectives, right? As I mentioned, typically in private equity, you're getting one perspective. You're getting the kind of super smart investment banking private equity perspective. Here by design, the folks that we've been able to surround ourselves with have very, very different life experiences and look at things from very, very different perspectives. And we get our best thinking that way, right? So I've often said, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room. And I mean that, from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think moving into when I think about the concept of resilience and in your sphere, Max, kind of building resilient companies, what do you find to be the attributes within those companies, and even kind of double clicking more, the leaders of those companies, like what are the things that they bring to the table that help build an organization that, hopefully gets to a best case scenario investment outcome?
Yeah. Well, I think some of the attributes for successful entrepreneurs sort of getting the business to a certain level, it's grit, it's tenacity, it's stick-to-itiveness, it's just keep going. Again, just keep going. One foot in front of the other, just keep going. So that's one of the things I see often with very successful entrepreneurs. The best, in my opinion, are people that have, high emotional intelligence, where they are, active listeners. And, these are folks who genuinely care deeply about their people and about the families that they're touching. So almost an altruistic component to the culture of the businesses that they're creating. Those are some of the key elements that we find pretty consistently across the board.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is Good to Great, which you may or may not have read, but
sure.
I think one of the concepts is like nothing happens in one fell swoop, and it's the compound effect, and it's this turn by turn of the flywheel, which I think you just nailed, where it's, again, there's no and that's been a reoccurring theme with high performing entrepreneurs that we've had on here, is it's just like the keep going aspect is it sounds so simple, yet it's so somewhat complex, where it's like literally that is a key recipe to performing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I wouldn't say there's any functional expertise like, sales guys are the best. Or, many of the companies we've invested in are, they're very technical, right? So, they may be PhD chemists, so they're not salespeople, but there is a commonality in terms of the attributes. And,
Yes.
I think you touched on it, Ryan.
Yeah. Max, I'm curious, as you've just grown in your career and it's evolved multiple times, I was reading this concept around fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. And it's this idea of, as young people, our goal as intelligent folks is to come into a room and to impress and to say, okay, I gotta nail my pitch. I gotta really say all the things I want. I gotta touch on all the notes. And then at some point, we grow up and we mature and we get wisdom, I think is really the word. And it becomes crystallized intelligence, which is less I need to execute perfectly here. And it's more, let me read the room. Let me understand who's the decision maker here and try to identify that person and communicate back with them. And that's just one example, of course, of kind of being in that position. But as you've grown up, as you've experienced and gained wisdom in the world of business, how has your perspective changed? What are ways that you interact with these business owners that maybe looks different today than it did, let's say, 20 years ago?
Yeah. You know, I think it really boils down to really being an active listener, being comfortable enough in your own skin to ask questions without any concern about how it might be perceived.
Right.
Right. And just a certain humbleness and vulnerability, kind of put yourself out there. And I find that as I've matured in my career, I've been able to really resonate and connect well with these founders. And it's again, I sort of contrast it to, an individual that, thinks they have all the answers, or more importantly, wants the person on the other side to think they have all the answers. So I'm not sure I'm articulating it particularly well, Mark and Ryan, but I think this notion of just being vulnerable, being authentic, and being confident enough in your own abilities to not be afraid to ask questions and like an insatiable curiosity around learning about their business, what got them there. I tend to want to really connect on a human level. The finance guys get into the numbers and balance sheets and EBITDA. That's not that interesting to me personally. I mean, I know it's important, obviously. I really want to connect on a human level. I want to understand what's motivated them, what keeps them up at night. So I'd say it's sort of an insatiable curiosity.
That's really good.
The thought that came to mind for me was like, it's a genuine curiosity and I think the people that get to that level, you start to realize, I think the more and more you do it, the more you don't know, and you can learn from people that know a lot more than you, back to kind of that other theme we were talking about, but kind of having this humility to be genuinely curious about how can I learn from this individual that's going to help me become a better fill in the blank.
Yeah, but Max, you said one other thing at the end there that I'm kind of struck by, and I think it comes back to motivation too, because your motivation, I think the industry that you're in probably brings a lot of folks that are motivated by money, by wealth, by finance, and that makes sense. It's the industry that it is. But what's interesting is your motivation is so distinct from that, which is empathetic, it's vulnerable, and it's just connection. It's human connection.
Yeah.
So all those things you articulated could be the same for someone who's passionate about making money, but it doesn't necessarily come across the same way.
Yeah. It's interesting. So we work with a consulting firm. We brought a consulting firm in. They do a lot of work in organizational assessment, organizational design, leadership development. And we, on occasion, we'll bring them into our portfolio companies to help us think about how can we transform it from a family-run business to a high-performing culture. But more importantly, we had them do a deep dive on each one of us here at Akoya, right? Like a personal assessment. And we do this for every C-suite executive we bring in. They go through a very detailed kind of psychological assessment, so we understand how we can help them, right? How do they cope under pressure, that sort of thing. So we did it for ourselves, and it was very illuminating.
Yes.
And then more importantly, what we did is we brought them in to say, okay, look, there's 8 of us. How do we communicate more effectively with one another, understanding our Hogans? It's called a Hogan assessment, right? So she did this work and she was kind of blown away, and she shared the results with her partner and said, look, I did a team assessment. Here it is. I want you to take a guess what this company does. and her partner read this, all the analysis and said, I would say that this is a non-for-profit.
Come on.
So we scored so high in altruism, which is collectively, across the board, very high on altruism. We also score high in commerce, right? So we are motivated, and we like to win.
Yeah.
But we do it in a really kind, gentle way, I guess. And and her watch out is, you guys are really nice. Sometimes you might be too nice.
Yep, that's real. Wow, that's powerful.
That's pretty cool.
So let me get that straight. The second partner she shared it with knew nothing about who it was or what.
Nothing. She just said, "Hey, take a guess. What do you think this company does?" And her partner said, "I think it's a non-for-profit."
Max, why are your motivations the way that they are? Is it? It's all of it, of course, right? But even when you were grinding, right? I just think it's such a misnomer. I think it's easy, just speaking plainly. You've done amazing things, Max. You're at a stage of your career where you've had a lot of success, and people probably say, "Oh, well, it was handed to you." Of course, it wasn't. You worked tooth and nail for what you've accomplished here, which is just incredible to hear. But why do you think your motivations are the way that they are?
I think a couple of things. I really like to win, so I am competitive, and I really, I play to win. But when I say play to win, it's really imperative to me that it is a win-win. It's not and I've always maintained this element of fairness. It's really got to work for both parties. I take no satisfaction in winning at somebody else's expense, right? So that's important. I also think for me, part of it, candidly, is motivated by a fear of failure. Like I just, I had an intense desire to succeed and an intense fear of failing.
Well, Max, as we kind of start to kind of bring this home, a couple things to finish, but if you were to rewind the clock, back things up to when you're, 20, 25, 30, what kind of advice would you have for yourself now, given what you've been through? Loaded question.
Yeah. Sure. When that's a really good question. When I was in my 20s, I think the advice I would have given myself in my 20s was to pay more attention to kind of quality, a little quality and balance of life, right? I in my 20s, wasn't working out as consistently. I was kind of burning the candle at both ends. I think I would have tried to advise myself to just take better care of myself physically, emotionally, mentally. What I've built into my life these days, which is immensely helpful, as I mentioned, yoga, meditation, I really make an effort to kind of get out in nature, hiking. I do it. I find that like incredibly nourishing to just be in nature. So I would have done more of that, I think, as I was in my 20s. And I think it really would have helped keep me grounded. And I also think I would have encouraged myself not to have self-doubt, like just have conviction, and stick to itiveness and just continue to kind of put one foot in front of the other.
I resonate with a lot of what you're saying personally, Max. And there's a quote that I've become really fond of recently. It was Nelson Mandela. He says, "I never lose. I either win or I learned." And I hear a lot of that in the way that you've approached your life and maybe what you would advise yourself back in those early days of like, there's no losing here, right? There's winning and getting better.
And Max, as we conclude here, what, just tangibly, like what are some of you've mentioned a few kind of habits that seem paramount for you, whether it's working out, meditation, being in nature. So what are maybe a couple of those top things for you? If they're ones you mentioned, then we can reiterate that. But and then any books you're reading, content, like what do you do to stay sharp and things like that?
Well, as I mentioned, meditate, yoga. I would like to find more time to do more reading. I'm kind of halfway through a couple of books.
Join the club. Yeah, we're making t-shirts. We'll get
I know
you one.
it's tough. Yeah, I'm getting ready to. Actually, next Monday we're leaving for Santa Barbara for the winter. So we spend, which has been great, frankly. I spend 4 months a year on the Central Coast in California, and that's being in the sunshine, in the mountains, and the ocean. I mean, that's just really, it really nourishes the soul.
Yeah.
So I can't emphasize enough, in my opinion, the importance on self-care. Just really trying to create some balance in your life, because it's a grind, and it's important to just kind of shut it off and have some other interests.
That's well said. Well, Max, thanks for spending time with us. I know that there's some awesome nuggets, I think, that are going to be super applicable to a lot of people. So we appreciate your time, and we love what you're keeping tabs on what you're building at Akoya with you and the team, because it's a special thing. So thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Great. Thanks, Max.
Thanks for engaging with this episode of the Masters of Resilience podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend or colleague. Stay up to date on all the latest episodes and get exclusive resources at mastersofresilience.com. We'll see you next time.